Okay, wonderful.
Just press OK on your machines.
Yes, and I'm going to just, as long as I have everyone here, I will. Okay, I've muted you all. And I will remember to unmute you, Anita, at the end, and just wave if you want me to unmute you if I say anything that people have an immediate question for. So I'm going to try to answer all the questions that Anita raised and we discussed beforehand by just telling you a little story of how I got involved in this. I'm not someone who by nature likes to be in politics. In fact, I'm the rabbi of a synagogue in the German colony, and I've done my best over the last 20 years to keep politics out of the shul so that it would be a place where everyone from all different backgrounds, all different political perspectives feel comfortable and can feel at home. So how did I get involved in this? So the story that I tell is as follows. A number of years ago, we were actually renting space for the Yemim Noraim at Ol Nechama, which is on Chopin Street, in their downstairs hall. And in the middle of the Rosh Hashanah davening on Yom Adin, all of a sudden some sewage is coming up from the hall. It's a basement hall, and so there is a sewage center not far from it. And in the middle of the davening, you literally see sewage coming in, seeping into by the seats where we're davening. And everyone is getting very, very nervous, and the smell becomes really unbearable. And we have to end davening. We have to go outside. And fortunately, we have a plumber that's part of our community, and he went to work to do whatever he could do so that we would be able to daven the next morning on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And as he's fixing it, I turn to him and I say, listen, this seems to me to be a really bad sign. We're in the middle of praying on Yom Adin, the day of judgment, and sewage is literally coming into our tefillot. Is this God telling us that he rejects our prayers? And he says, what are you talking about? I've been praying with all my heart to make a parnasa, to make a living. And here, on Rosh Hashanah, I'm praying, I'm a plumber, and I'm praying for a parnasa, and sewage is coming up from the floor. This is a sign from God that it's going to be a great year. So I think of that story a lot when I think about politics, because on one hand, I think politics has, unfortunately, has a lot of negative things about it. It gets people angrier than normal. People very often go to extremes. There's a lot of money around, corruption potentially. And there's things that it tears people apart. And it's therefore something that I've done my best to try to avoid. But on the other hand, my plumber friend sort of gave me the perspective that, you know what, there might be some positives. Can we look at it in a way where we see politics as, the art of the possibility of helping people, of improving things that we really all cherish, like our city, and it could actually be a force maybe to bring people together. And so that's how I decided I want to try to look at politics. And the reason why I was forced to look at it this way is because the following happened. I was asked to run by, as the woman I mentioned to you before, Deputy Mayor Chagit Moshe. And that came about because I was having a number of problems at our shul. We always have interactions with the city. Very often they're not good, on zoning, licensing, a whole series of different issues. And there was one particular issue that I was not able to solve on my own for about 2 years. There was a bureaucrat in one of the departments of the city that needed to write me a letter. And this bureaucrat would not answer my phone calls, would not answer my emails. I even went down to the city several times. They kicked me out of her office. And I went to different city council members. I just started calling people and making meetings. And I met with about 6 of them. And all of them wanted to help me tremendously. They were all very positive. They all said what was taking place was wrong. It's silly. Let's solve the problem. And none of them were actually able to solve the problem. And then someone said, I meet with this woman, Chagit Moshe. I went, sat down in her office, and in about 5 minutes, she had the person who was the bureaucrat on the phone. In about 10 minutes, I had a letter from that bureaucrat. And by the end of the day, all our problems with the city were completely solved. And I was very impressed, and I was obviously very grateful. But that's not the reason why I ultimately agreed. A couple months later, she called and said, would I like to run? I wanted to express my gratitude, but there was a lot more to it. One of the things was that in the interim, I heard more about this woman, Chagit Moshe, who I had not known before. And I saw that she accomplished all these tremendous, amazing things. She's a real bulldozer. She gets things done. That's her claim to fame. She's a pragmatic individual. She's not an ideologue. She'll help anyone who has a genuine good cause in the city to improve the entire city. Her main focus is on education. She was able to increase the budget that was given for making renovations and building new buildings for schools in the city from around 60 million shekels when she first took office. The first year she had it at 90 million, and this last year she had gotten it up to 310 million shekels. And she knows how to, there are some, downsides of politics. There's a lot of, fighting back and forth, and she's effective at it. And she's doing it for the right reasons. And she was able to open up 17 different schools. She was able to open up 17 different youth group clubhouses, for B'nai Akiva or Ezra, Ariel, all the different religious youth groups. That's another one of her interests. Anyway, she just has an incredibly positive, practical record, meaning things that genuinely make an impact on people's lives. And so I was very impressed. And I felt that it would be a good thing if there was something I could do to sort of keep her sort of working on behalf of the city. That made sense to me. I was still on the fence, though, but I wanted to help her. And then she told me the real reason why she wants me to run, though, is she wants Anglos to have representation. She says she sees the numbers. The numbers of Anglos every year is growing. It's a very large population, and it's an incredibly important population. Forget about, self-praise for just a moment. She's looking at the numbers and she says, Olim come with incredible resources, with connections. Olim are able to bridge Jerusalem to the rest of the world. Olim have the potential to bring in lots of business. Olim, by and large, are common. They're part of they add to the workforce. They create new jobs. They create many of the very significant and important and meaningful and exemplary nonprofit organizations are founded by Olim. So she sees this is a huge number. It's an important population. Their success, the more Olim come, more likely Jerusalem is going to be able to succeed on a whole series of different ways, including economically, which I'll talk about in just a little bit when we talk about the poverty in the city. And she says, Olim need to get better representation. They don't have any. And they're very significant. Just so you know, every year about something like, I think, 1,500 new Olim from North America choose Jerusalem as their landing point. There's about 3,000 who come in altogether to Israel, and half come to Jerusalem. And unfortunately, after a couple of years, about half of them leave. So there's a real struggle to keep Jerusalem to be attractive and to maintain these Olim. And she says, so what are the issues? What are the concerns of the Olim community? She says she's from a Tunisian background. She's born in Beersheba. She's been in Yerushalayim for a long time, very well connected in the Israeli community, the native Israeli. But she says, I don't know. I need someone on the ground. So that's why she asked me, and she said, and I want you to not only represent. That's your primary. Anita, you began by saying, how does it work with the lists, which is one of the crazy things about Israeli society, especially for us from the West. We're accustomed to usually voting for a person, which allows also the people to have some accountability for their representative. If the representative doesn't do what they want them to do, they can vote them out. But when you have lists, you don't have that accountability. So to a certain extent, she created a form of accountability. She says, your job is to represent the Anglo community. You don't have to worry about other things. Obviously, Olim have the same interest as many Israelis on, lowering the cost of housing. So, we can afford apartments and we can have our children stay here in Yerushalayim. And of course, we want more good paying jobs. We want, traffic to work. We want garbage picked up. Everyone has those interests. But Olim has specific interests as well. And she says, and you'll be held accountable by that population, and you'll serve that population. So once she said that was really my mandate, that I could really focus on the needs of the Anglo population. I agreed, and I accepted it because I felt that, we do have some special needs and interests. And as I said before, more than that, we also have certain values. We're accustomed to, at least high expectations of good governance, of efficient governance, which are not always synonymous with what takes place in the city. And I felt that perhaps if I focus on those type of values that we have, not only can it serve the Anglo population, but if I bring the Anglo values to the city, we might serve the entire city and do a great service for them. So that was the second reason why I ultimately said yes. And the third reason is that I personally, my own personal experience in just observing political life, is that it's a very divisive force in our Israeli society. I love living in Israel. I find Israelis wonderful. I find the culture, I found life here really incredibly rewarding and enriching. And I find the political discourse absolutely terrible. It's one of the things that tears us apart. And my feeling is that perhaps we can, if we sort of bring a little bit of our own creativity to the forefront, if we work at it a little bit, perhaps we can change that dynamic a little bit, where we don't view each other as enemies. We want to listen to one another, with even when we disagree, but we do so with respect and humility and creativity. Perhaps we can, solve things in a better way. And that's what I want to bring to City Council. I'll just give you one quick example, and then I'll turn back to some of the questions that was asked before. My general feeling is, if our first reaction is not screaming and yelling at the other person and seeing them as the enemy, and that it's either I win or they win, and therefore there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. If we don't look at it that way, I think it opens up a lot of possibilities. So I'll just give you one example. Next to our shul, there is a beautiful park. It's a children's park, Gan Shoshanim. And some of the families in my community had a great idea. There's one slide in the park. Can we convince the city to invest and make it a nicer park? And they were able to do that. They were able to get the funding. They were able to create a plan. And they had to close the park for a little bit in order to do the renovations. The park has been closed for more than 2 years now, and the children have had nowhere to go. What's holding it up? So in new parks around the city now, someone had an idea that it would be valuable to put a little coffee shop in the middle of the park. Nothing serious, sells a little coffee, maybe some cold sandwiches, or not a restaurant, but just a little coffee shack. So I heard about that. And I said, you know what? I've always wanted, as part of our synagogue, to open up a little coffee shop. I wanted to call it Cafe V'Hafta L'Recha Kamoka, right? The theme of the coffee shop would be to try to bring people together. We focus on those things in Jewish law that talk about, personal relationships between people. So I asked about the tender, had it already gone out? And I was told that the coffee shop is what is holding up the entire park. Why is that? So the secular party said, if we open up a coffee shop in this park, it has to be open on Shabbat for secular families so they can enjoy it on Shabbat. And we will not permit, I'm just looking, someone has their mute button undone. If you can see it, maybe to put it on. We will not permit the coffee shop not to be open on Shabbat. Whoever gets the tender has to commit to opening it up on Shabbat. So the religious party said, absolutely not, on 2 grounds. One is, first of all, we don't want it open on Shabbat. But secondly, that's not fair for, if a businessman is willing to give up the business on Shabbat, he should have the freedom. She should have the freedom to do so. So because of this dispute, there's no coffee shop. and there's no park, and it's been closed now for 2 years. And things like that happen all across the city. You have tremendous inefficiencies because people can't see past their differences. So seems to me it's a very simple solution in this one regard. For those of you who've been to my synagogue, know we have a kiddush every Shabbat. We feed 150 something people every Shabbat. It would not be hard to run that coffee shop consistent with Shabbat laws. You could have a hot urn. We could make sandwiches ahead of time, and we would not charge people. Maybe we'd even bring up a cholent. Certainly, we'd bring up some wine. People could make kiddush if they wanted to. The secular families would not be upset that they were getting free food on Shabbat. The religious families could come, and there's no Michal Shabbat, so they could enjoy the same area. And you'd have a meeting point between religious and secular families, and a beautiful park Shabbat afternoon. And it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the religious values are upkept. It's a win for the secular families who we absolutely need to keep in Yerushalayim. They make a major contribution to the city. We absolutely need to make their experience in Yerushalayim a positive one. And it's a win for the city because we create a place where people can come together rather than be separated from one another. And I think that type of thinking of trying to really find out what is it that your need is. Maybe we can find another way to fulfill that need that at the same time also meets the needs of different populations. And I'd like to bring that type of thinking to the City Hall, which I think would also then hopefully bring people together and in a much better way. I think there are some other solutions as well that maybe I'll get to in the questions and answer period. Let me just at least touch upon before I open up the questions. Carl, by the way, do we have any questions at this point in time? So no, nothing. Okay, so if anyone has, please, by all means, send them to Carl. It's not hard for a rabbi to talk nonstop for hours. You can imagine if a rabbi is becoming a politician, the danger of never having me stop speaking is fairly significant. So you should feel free to jump in at any time.
Where will the election be? Because we only voted before in the main presidential elections for the city and the main building. Where will the election be?
Okay, so the elections will be wherever you normally go to vote. Usually they're in schools. In theory, you should have gotten a card. If you have not, you may get one. I've seen that the city is not necessarily overly efficient. That's one of the things I'd like to change there. For example, in the city, there's an ombudsman's office, right? If you have complaints about city efficiency, you can turn to the ombudsman office and try to fix the problem. The problem is there's no phone number for you to reach out to the person. Simply, they have a fax machine. So I'm impressed as the next person that the city is able to engage in time travel, and they're asking us to go back in time to the 1990s to have a fax. But most people have no way to get in touch with this city ombudsman now. In any event, they should have sent you something, or they should send you something. But if you don't receive it, and I'll be honest, I have not received it, so it's very likely that many others have not as well. Go to where you normally vote, right? I am on Palmach Street. The Beit Yaakov school around the corner is where I normally vote. It would be the same thing. If anyone here doesn't know where to vote, send me an email after our gathering. You can get all my contact information from Anita and Carl or Dorraine and Barry.
What day will the election be?
I'll get to them in 1 second. So just send me an email and I'll happily you give me your address and I'll tell you where your polling booth is. The election is Tuesday, February 27th. It will be a day off. So there'll be plenty of time to be able to do it. That's Tuesday, February 27th.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Nefesh B'Nefesh brings a lot of Anglos, and they do a lot of programming. Can we unite with them and do some things together with them?
The city, you should know, does do a lot of things with Nefesh B'Nefesh. The city helps fund many of their projects, and I'll go one step further. The building that Nefesh B'Nefesh is in was made possible by the woman who I mentioned at the very beginning, the head of our list, Chagit Moshe. That building that they're in was actually dedicated to a different nonprofit organization. And the other nonprofit organization was not able to fulfill certain requirements in order to take over the building that they're in. And Chagit heard from the inside that it was becoming available, and she made a call right away and told Rabbi Josh Fass, the head of Nefesh B'Nefesh, get over there now. Let's get it for you. And that's how it took place. So there is a lot of partnerships that take place, both financially. The city is supportive of that, and also intellectually. In other words, there's meetings that take place trying to find out what are the needs. Before I decided to do this run, I went and sat with Rabbi Josh Fass, that of Nefesh B'Nefesh, and they said, what are the complaints? What are the needs you're finding out? Most of them have to do with young families having problems with getting their kids into school, or having, while they're in schools, not getting the type of supplemental support that they need, which is usually budgeted for. But for some reason, there's a gap between what is budgeted for and the actual implementation. And the other source you should know, just today, in fact, the Ministry of Aliyah and Absorption. There's the minister is someone by the name of Ofer Sofir. He just announced, together with the head of the Jewish Agency, a huge infusion of budgets to help strengthen Aliyah, and also help strengthen the experience for people once they make Aliyah. And they went on to say something very interesting. During the war, there have been everything's been cut, right? The budgets for so many things have been cut, but there are 4 areas that are viewed as essential, and so they have not been cut, or in fact, they've actually added money to. Those include things to develop further high tech. The assumption is investments now will bring in investments and rewards in the future. In addition to that, Haredi schooling, right, to improve Haredi schooling, especially trade schooling, to help Haredi individuals who have not received the education that prepares them for the workforce, to create schooling that will help them. That has continued. Certain housing and Aliyah. Aliyah budget has actually gone up. And I actually had the honor of meeting with this minister yesterday, and we spoke about the needs of Olim, and the case I tried to make to him, and I was very rewarded to see that it was included in their press conference today, was that it's an investment, that Olim are energize the economy. They are, however many dollars you invest in Aliyah, it will come back several-fold in terms of the resources that they bring and the contributions that they'll eventually make. And they promoted that idea. You can see the article in the Jerusalem Post today. He's sitting in the middle between 2 other individuals. So there is a lot of partnership with Nefesh B'Nefesh. But of course, Aliyah doesn't just come from Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is Western. You also have Aliyah from England and I'm talking about Anglo Aliyah, South Africa, Australia, and France. Anti-Semitism has been up, and one of the things that's happened is the people who are opening up teaks, starting the Aliyah process, has increased by 100% in the United States. I think it's something like 40% in England, 150% in Canada, and from France, it's 300%. So those of us who are already here have got to be a part of that process of helping pave the way so that these people, not only feel welcome to come, but when they come, that they have jobs, they have schools for their children, and they have communities. And we have to strengthen the communities that are going to welcome them, and strengthen the job market, and so forth and so on. And that's one of the things. That's one of the big things that I hope to spend a lot of my time doing. If there's feel free, as I said, to jump in with other questions. If not, I'll mention, I have to get back to one of the original questions that Anita began with, which is the relationship with the Haredi population here in Jerusalem. I want to be very careful not to say anything negative against our Haredi brothers and sisters. That's one of the things that I'm really committed to, is that we should not disparage anyone, even when we disagree with some of their lifestyle choices. The Haredi population does something that we all should do, which is they vote. They vote uniformly. They have close to 100% turnout. That's why in the Jewish side of Jerusalem is about 60% Jewish, 40% Arab. The Arabs, by and large, don't vote in the city elections. Of the 60%, it's about a third Haredi, a third Dati Lumi, and a third secular or traditional. So you should see a city council makeup of about 10-10-10, right? There's 30 seats. This past time, the Haredi representation is 15, and the other 15 are divided amongst the Dati Lumi and the secular parties. Because we vote, let's say, at 60 or 70%, they vote at 100%. The real fear is that because of the war, our turnout is going to drop dramatically. There are 16,000 miluimnikim, reservists, who are currently from Jerusalem, who are currently not in Jerusalem, and we're incredibly proud of them. I'm inspired by them, and it actually makes me feel very proud of the Jewish path that I've pursued. In fact, one of the slogans we've been using for our party since Chagit Moshe is the head of education in Jerusalem is Mechankim. We are educating towards. What do our schools teach? Well, our schools, we're trying to teach them towards, a successful integration into a modern society. We're trying to, allow people to mechanchim la'achdut, to educate towards education and towards Zionism, and it's been successful, right? Our community is incredibly well and overrepresented in fighting in Gaza in the north, and unfortunately also in the deaths in that regard. So you have 16,000 reservists who are permitted to vote, but I can tell you from speaking to them, it's not their top priority right now, right? It's not, many of ours not top priority, but it's not their top priority. And if it's a day off, that means there's no school, that means their spouses, it's not a day off for their spouses. It means because they have to be home with the kids. So there's a real fear that there will be a lot less voting. And of course, because of the war in general, our heads and our hearts are not into, this process. Right? We had actually requested it be delayed again until such time that, all the soldiers are home. But the powers that be in this instance says the voting has to take place. So that's one of the reasons why the elections are so important, to go out and encourage other people to go and vote. The fear is, because of this particular dynamic, even if Haredi voting gets the exact same numbers they got last time, rather than 15 seats, they could have close to 20 seats out of 30. And that changes the dynamic of the city. Again, I don't want to take anything away from Haredi population. I want them to get everything that is important to them and is consistent with their numbers. If they're a third, they should get a third of the resources that are taking place. But they'll advocate for 2/3 of the resources if that's what they have representation on City Hall. And they'll get that because that's how it works. It works by representation. There are meetings amongst the whole council as well as committees that determine things like school allocations. There's a building, and if a party has the political influence to take that building over, take it away from a secular school and turn it into a Haredi school, they can do so. Allocations for new buildings, funding for programming and resources, and tax breaks and the like. Of course, one of the things we would like to get in, and one of the things I would like to get in, is to advocate for additional funding for not only our schools and our youth groups and our communities, but also to advocate for what we've just been discussing about Aliyah and the like. And of course, at least I believe, I hope, that our party also has the big picture in mind, which is not just our own personal parochial interests, but the well-being of the whole city. And the well-being of the whole city means, a very active workforce, bringing in lots of jobs, bringing in high-paying jobs, so people will want to stay here and they can afford to stay here, as well as what we've mentioned before about lowering the price of homes and things along those lines. So I think that may address one of the questions we spoke about a little bit, about why now the elections are significant, as well as the relationship with the Haredi parties, particularly connected to the elections. Anyone else have questions or comments?
Rabbi, I have a question. How
Please.
far down the list are you?
Sure. So in theory, every party puts forth a list of 20 people, right? That's obviously overly optimistic that any party would get that many people. We put forth 20, although in truth, we only really put forth a list of 7 to 8 people. 8 is also overly unrealistic based upon previous experience in polling. Although, as I said, the Dati Leumi community, in theory, could get a third. But we diversify our vote, perhaps more than others. So we have this list of about 7 or 8 people. I'm number 4 on the list, although we have what's called a rotation agreement with number 3 on the list. So just to tell who the people are, and then show what my chances would be. So number 1 on the list is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, as I've mentioned a few times, Chagit Moshe. She's currently holds the education department. There's a picture of Chagit. Thank you. There you go. Great. And she holds the education as well as the youth movements portfolio. That's why things that she wanted to make sure and have influence over in that regard. Number 2 on the list is a guy by the name of Yehuda Freudinger. He lives in Piskat Zev. He really is, I've gotten to know him over the time now, is really a tzaddik of sorts. He chose two things, 2 portfolios. One is special needs. He has a son who is blind, and it's a real passion for him. And he has fought incredibly well for additional funding for a lot of activities for special needs in the city. And he's also done some very creative things. So, for example, he's gotten millions of shekels for synagogues that will make their buildings more accessible for handicap. He has helped create a theater for Down syndrome children, where they put on the shows, they build the sets, they do everything, and then they have a big show. He has done a whole series of different programs for special needs, and he's raised the salaries of the coordinators. He's raised the quality of the programming. He's really done some wonderful stuff with that. And his second portfolio that he chose is Gil HaShlishi, right? The third age, right? What we call in America senior citizens. So, and here too, he's done a lot of on both creativity and fighting. In other words, he's got additional funding for different programming, but he's also been creative. He's created something like 20 to 30 parliaments. What's a parliament? He gets in different neighborhoods groups of people to come together, and they have discussions on a whole series of different issues, like a mini parliament of sorts. He created a soccer league. You know how there's youth soccer leagues? So he created a soccer league for people 65 and plus with, T-shirts and games and the whole thing. He's really done a lot of, I think, very interesting stuff for that population. So he's number 2, and he's currently a member of the city council. Number 3, who is a businessman. He's a vice president at Mobileye. He's a high-tech entrepreneur. His name is Tzachi Namir. He also happens to be a community activist in Kiryat Menachem. Very sophisticated guy, very, very smart, nice, good guy. During the war, unfortunately, he, sort of took a leave of Mobileye, and he went down to Gaza, and he and a couple of other individuals created certain technology on the tanks. Very early on, one of the problems with the tanks is they can't see in 360 degrees. They only see what's in front of them. So he created a project where they have cameras on all the tanks to be able to see everything. So people can't sneak up behind them and they're able to keep their eyes. So he was involved in that. And presumably he'll sort of take a half time, some type of break from Mobileye if he is elected. He's number 3. And then I'm number 4. Number 5 is a person who's involved in real estate and a lawyer here in the neighborhood I'm in Katamon, a guy by the name of Daniel Schneller. And then we have a youth candidate at number, 6, who's been a big activist in his 20s for youth. Unfortunately, we had 2 women who had to drop out. One of them is still in Miluim, and she was really torn. The army gave her the freedom to leave Miluim in order to rejoin the elections, but she felt that she should fulfill her duty, and so she stayed in Miluim, so she's not able to run. And then we also had one traditional woman for similar purposes not able to actually join us. So she was a traditional, not an Orthodox woman, but a traditional woman who wanted to sort of be a part of a religious ticket. So that's a list. And in terms of the rotation that I mentioned, so if Tsachi, our number 3, gets in, but we don't get number 4, so he'll be in the first 2.5 years of the term. The terms are for 5 years, and then I'll join in for the second 2.5 years. We'll switch, and if I get 4, then we'll both get in for full times. And I should mention one other thing that's important, which is even if I don't get in, part of my agreement in being willing to run is that I have a weekly meeting with Chagit Moshe, because I really see her as a tremendous asset for our community, that she can really get things done. She knows how to do it. And so I asked for a weekly meeting, whether I'm elected or not elected, so that I can bring issues and concerns that we may have to her desk and continue to have her work on our behalf, regardless of the results of the elections. But obviously, if I get in, I'll be able to have more influence on a regular basis.
Rabbi, we have 2 questions. One, how many parties are running?
I don't know. There's a lot of parties that are running that probably will not get any seats. The polls that exist now show the following parties getting seats. There's the Haredi parties, which include Shas, of course, Gimel, which is sort of a combination of a few other Haredi parties. So that's on one end. And as I said, their poll numbers, could range anywhere from 12 to 20 out of the 30 seats, based upon the number of people who actually go out and vote. On the non-Haredi side, you have us, right? We're Tet Bet, Tov, getting seats. You have a party to our right. I'll try to, I hope I'm being fair in describing everyone. I'll do my best. I view us as a central religious party, a broad religious party. When Chagit Moshe speaks, for example, about who are our schools that I'm trying to help, she says, we go from Hartman, which is, sort of liberal orthodoxy, to Chorev, to Yeshiva Tzfia, to Noam. I don't know if any of these schools have any meaning to you, but it's a broad range. To our right are 2 additional parties. One is Aryeh King. Aryeh King has a party, I think it's called Miyuchadim, and his party is affiliated with Ben Gvir, meaning, again, on some level, local politics has nothing to do with national politics. There's usually an affiliation between the local and the national parties, but they don't necessarily need. We're also affiliated with national parties, which I'm happy to talk about, and maybe I will speak about a little bit at the very end. But they don't really have an influence on the local issues. Aryeh King, however, has asked, and he's campaigned with Ben Gvir to make the point that part of his campaign is concerned with national issues and more political issues. So he's to our right, and then even to the right of him, Noam is running as well, and they're another religious party. To our left is Hitorarut. Hitorarut started as a student party, maybe, I don't know, is it 10, 15 years ago? In the last election, they were very successful. They ran a candidate for mayor, and they had the largest party, actually, I think, with 7 seats. It's a group of young activists. They have religious and secular within their party. I have some things to say about them if people have specific interests, but it's not fair to categorize them one way or the other. My main complaint with them is that they made a principled decision not to sit in the government, in the city council as part of the governing coalition the last time around, which means that they didn't get any portfolios that they could actually influence the outcome. So they principally says, we don't think it's right that the coalition has so many Haredi parties in it, so we're not going to sit. However, they gave up the ability to actually bring home results for their constituents as a result. So they are not polling anywhere near, I think they're polling maybe about 2 seats than where they were previously with their 7. Most of the people in that election from 5 years ago, in fact, all of them, are not running this time around. It's almost like a different group, but they have religious and secular people working together with a little bit more of a secular bent than religious. One of their big projects was to try to encourage public transportation on Shabbat as a way of encouraging secular Jerusalemites to stay here a little bit further. So liberal religious, I guess is how you would say. Those, it's more secular, but for those who are religious, they're liberal religious. To the left of them is a merged party that's also polling to get seats called Ichud Yerushalayim. That's headed by Yossi Chavilio, who's also running for mayor. And it's a merger of a few different national political parties, their local representatives, Meretz, Yesh Atid, those that were very involved in the judicial reform protest movement. They're interesting because while they are further to the left of Hitorarut, they did join the previous government. So the previous with the Haredim, and even though they're running ads now, you'll see that say you have a choice between a secular, liberal, enlightened city or a Haredi, Meshichistic, religious city. Vote for us. They are very practical, and so the last time they actually joined the coalition, even though they were, as I said, opposed to the Haredi participation, and they actually did therefore get results. They were able to provide for their voters because they had access to budgets and the like. So there's an interesting dynamic between them and Hitorarut. I don't know which is the better path, if you have a certain principle or if you want to get things done. So that's the 2 of them. And the last party, which no one really knows about, is Moshe Leon. He's running for mayor. He also has a party. Now, the last time around, no one voted for his party. He won the mayor, but he didn't get any seats of city councilors to join with him. And it's not clear what will happen this time. On one hand, people feel, you know what, if I vote for him for mayor, I've given him 1 vote. Now I'll vote for one of the other parties that more represent me. Some people say it's my way of, if they really love him as mayor, it's my way of strengthening him as mayor. I'll give him, 1 or 2 city councilors as well. Though those parties that are just mentioned are the only ones from the polling I've seen that are passing. There's a threshold, right? They're the only one passing. There are a number of other individual parties. I should say there's one other one. I don't think she's passing. Strangely enough, is a woman by the name of Entebbe, Yael Entebbe, who in previous elections, she ran representing just Pisgat Zev. In this election, she's running representing the Likud. So she might be the only one that's not quite passing, but is close to passing. So that's my understanding of the election layout at this point in time.
Rabbi Irv has a question,
Yes.
which is a good one. He wants to know what are the top 2 issues for the city council that you'll be facing should you be elected immediately. And I'm going to throw my question in as we're down to the last 3 minutes. What are we doing with our Arab population?
Wow.
And how are we dealing with this within the city in understanding your attitude towards inclusiveness?
Yes. Okay. Well, 3 minutes, I don't know, but I'll give it a shot. I'll say one issue that's definitely very facing, that is the city is poor. Okay. We don't feel it. There's a socioeconomic metric that sets up that it describes Israeli cities across the board from 1 to 10. There are very few cities that are 10. I think Savion and Kfar Shmaryahu are 10. Those are the wealthiest. Modi'in is very high. It's a 9 because they don't have a lot of kids, and usually both parents are working. Tel Aviv, I think, is a 7 or an 8. Dimona, Beersheba, they're a 5. Jerusalem is a 2. Okay, Jerusalem I think of the 150 poorest neighborhoods in Israel, 54 of them are in Jerusalem, and that's an increase. In the late 1990s, it was 5. It's jumped to 55. So Jerusalem is very poor. We may not feel that because there's about 50,000 Jerusalemites who live in neighborhoods that are a 7 or above. So probably a lot of us live in a neighborhood that feels like a 7, so we don't feel it. But as a whole, that means there's a lot of poverty in our city, which means that it has, I think, 2 major challenges. One is, it means that we don't have tax revenue from the citizenship. 50% of the population is below the poverty line. That means they have greater needs on one hand, and they also can't contribute to the tax base on the other. In Tel Aviv, 80% of their tax revenue comes from business, but we don't have that type of a business. So one of the biggest things that we're facing, and it's going to always be facing, is how do we increase the economic well-being of the city? I think I've written some proposals. If you go to my website, chaimpear.com, you'll see I have 10 ideas. Some of them include, creating a economic czar. I would actually think Ole would do great at this, who travels the world, who tries to bring businesses and maybe goes to Jewish CEOs and tries to convince them, for Zionist reasons, open up a head office or open up a satellite office in Jerusalem. Whatever it is, we have to increase business offices in Jerusalem and have high-paying jobs, because then people will move here to Jerusalem rather than to Tel Aviv. And the second related to that is Olim. Olim is again this bridge. Olim come, the top 2 fields of Olim last year making Aliyah was law and medicine, right? Those people can be bridges in medical technologies and high-tech law and all these things. We could have offices here instead of all the offices in Tel Aviv. So that's one element, and I think, from my point of view, Aliyah is not just my own personal interest, but it's also in the interest of the whole city. Related to that is, because the city is poor, the mayor is always looking for places to make money. And one of the big issues that is tearing apart the city on some level is the high towers. There are plans to build these migdalim all along the light rail, 20-story, 30-story, even 40-story buildings that will change the nature of Jerusalem. It will feel different. It will look different. And that, I was just at a meeting last night, that was their number one concern. They didn't want the change of aesthetics, but they also didn't want what it's going to bring in terms of a tremendous amount of extra traffic and all these other things. But they bring money, because it means developers are paying additional taxes. And very often, on one hand, you would think it would be good because it creates more apartments, and there's a housing shortage in Jerusalem. And if you have more apartments, the prices go down, so younger families can maybe get apartments. The problem is that most of these are going to be luxury apartments, and most of them are going to be bought by foreign overseas buyers, which the mayor is happy because they'll be paying full arnona. But the rest of us, I don't think it necessarily produces the results that would be best for the city. So those are two big issues that are coming. And Anita, to come to your point, it's a bigger question. And
Maybe you should write a paper on it and put it on your website.
yes.
And read it.
So I actually, believe it or not, I actually did. One of the reasons why I think Anita and I have had this conversation before, that one of the, I mentioned before that this is a local election. We're not really connected to national parties. However, in order to run, you very often need a national party to be a sponsor of some sort. So when I first joined Chagit Moshe, when she offered me the position, she was representing the Mafdal party. You remember the Mafdal of old? It's Bayit Yehudi. She was also the head of that party. That party, however, did not get into the Knesset. So she had to decide what to do, which party to join in order to run in the local elections. So she chose to merge with Tsinuta Datit. That's the Smotrich party, which in the national elections had merged with Ben Gvir, or they ran together. And we've had this conversation. That's not at all my way of looking at the world. I think it's quite problematic, and was a moral stain actually to be connected to Ben Gvir in that regard. And I mentioned this to Chagit Moshe and said, I don't know if it's a good idea to merge with the Tziniut Datit party, but that was my first introduction to politics. You don't always get what you want. There are certain compromises that are made. And her argument is twofold, which is, one, we're offering a broad religious party, right? The left and the right of the religious parties, they're running together as one party. And maybe we can change from the inside what that party, what the Dati Leumi community looks like, meaning she got to choose the list. Her list, which is this representative of the Dati, I told you, is the mainstream Dati Leumi list in Jerusalem. Her list is I think, fairly, what I would say, open, committed, but open Dati Leumi community. Something everyone on the list I'm very impressed with, and this to a certain extent connects to the question you spoke about, which is the Arab population. I have actually written a paper. If anyone is having problems falling asleep one night, it's on my website. It's 70 pages long about how I think Judaism looks at minorities in Israel, or should look at it, based upon the Ger Toshav principle, which is that on one hand we exert our full sovereignty. In Jerusalem, I think it should be totally under Jewish control, but the best way of demonstrating your sovereignty is to make sure that minorities are well taken care of, and that they're in fact the best treated Arabs in the world should be those that are in our sovereignty. And I think that's the biblical model of the Ger Toshav. The biblical model of the Ger Toshav required that once a minority recognized Israeli sovereignty, that you had to provide help with economics, healthcare, and a whole series of different benefits, according to the Ramban.
Okay, Rabbi, I think we should stop there.
Yes.
Because I know that, Dorraine, if you'll unmute
Sure.
yourself. And
One thing-
if people want to stay a little bit afterwards, they can. The rabbi might continue that discussion.
Sure.
Carl and I want to thank you, and Dorraine, you can summarize.
I'll summarize that we really need you to win, so we have to get our friends out to vote. It's going to be I'd like you to repeat just a little bit. The cards I got was the original white cards, and
Yes.
for the last election. I haven't gotten any other cards.
So those are
And
them.
do you have a symbol of the party, or we'll just send it out again? Okay,
The best thing to do is
Anita showing it.
oh, good. Okay. It's Tet Bet. You see that right there? You'll get a white piece of paper that says Tet Bet right there, and that's what you put in for the city council vote.
Anyway, we have to get our friends out to vote. That's the big thing. We have to talk to everybody and tell them that their vote really does count.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us. And
Thank you for
we're happy you're
sharing.
running.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As I said,
Thank you, everyone.
as Anita said, I'm happy to stay on if anyone has additional questions, or you have my email now. You should feel free to use it.
Rabbi, I do have an additional question about the Arab issue.
Yes.
So if they have no representation on the city council, how do you take care of them?
It's a problem. It's a real problem. There was an Arab who ran 5 years ago. We actually hosted him at our house by the name of Ramadan Dabash. He's one of these individuals who recognizes Israel's sovereignty. And his argument was, you should vote for me. And the funny thing is, he got almost no votes in any of the Arab community, but you could see how people vote. He got 300 votes in Katamon. We held, and part of the reason is the following. The mayor, I think, has done a good job balancing. He has a very tough job, whoever the mayor is. You have to balance a lot of interests, right? And he has, I think, a lot of goodwill to the Arab community. He understands that the city as a whole can only succeed if we all succeed. If you have, terrible infrastructure in one part of the city, that reflects poorly on the entire city. So he has a genuine interest when budgets are created that he puts aside a significant amount of money for Arab development, consistent with their numbers, even though they don't have representation asking for it, he puts it aside nevertheless. However, that's in the opening budget. The way it works in Israel is there's an opening budget, and then everyone begins to fight over it. And they fight over it, and push comes to shove. So, the mayor has goodwill and he puts a certain amount, and then a Haredi party says, listen, if you don't give us extra money for this, we're not going to vote for the things that you want, the more towers or whatever it may be. And everyone fights for their particular interests. Meaning everyone starts off with, everyone should get what they want, but then they begin to fight because there's a limited pie. And so that piece of the pie goes down. Again, people know that people understand that. I've had this conversation with Chagit Moshe, not regarding Arab parties, but regarding secular schools. She says, my job is to make sure that every school in Jerusalem is a good school. And she has worked and she's, she's fought for extra funding for renovations in secular schools. But in her heart of hearts, if it came down between two different schools, she would probably have more of interest in her own sectorial interest.
Yes.
And so Arabs need representation, and the mayor would not be opposed to it because it would help balance, when someone's putting pressure on him, it would help balance him. Actually, the mayor purposely did not have anyone wearing a kippah in his list, because he approached us and said, I need you to help balance me. When the Haredi parties start insisting on certain things, I need your party to be successful so that I can say, I'd love to help you, but Chagit said she won't let me do that. So there is a pressure that is required, and the Arabs lack that pressure. It doesn't mean they don't get anything, but it does mean they probably don't get as much as they should.
Approximately how much of the Arab population are citizens that we're speaking about?
Well, no, there are very few
in Jerusalem.
Yeah, very few citizens, but many permanent residents, meaning they have the right to vote. The city is about 40% Arab, and the majority of them have the right to vote. The majority of them do not exercise that right. There's two interesting things that you might say about that. One is my sort of personal take on a lot of these issues is because people fight over a limited pie, the best thing we can do is to increase the pie, right? I love pie, right? That's why economics plays a role in ethics. If we can bring in more business, if we can get more taxpayers, if we can, do these things that are good for the city, that means there's more of a budget, and then there's less pressure for the fighting over it. The second thing I would say is the issue of UNRWA, I think, demonstrates different ways of dealing with challenging issues, particularly in the Arab community. So Aryeh King, who I mentioned before, he's had a number of protests outside of the UNRWA in Jerusalem saying that UNRWA schools should be shut down in Jerusalem. I don't necessarily disagree with him. What we know about UNRWA and everything that's going on, they're teaching incitement. That's not good for us, and it's not good for the Arab population. But that's not going to accomplish anything, in my opinion. It's on a national level, has nothing to do with a local decision. What Chagit, she has the same interest, but she came from a totally different perspective. She's added additional funding for Arab schools that will adopt the Israeli curriculum. So over the last 5 to 10 years, over the last 5 to 10 years.
Carl's saying that didn't Prime Minister Bennett, when he was educational minister, initiate
Correct.
that, right?
Absolutely. It starts at the top. They're actually in this, she was the chairman of the party that he ran on, of Bayit Yehudi. So, and it's one of these win-win situations. So it used to be the majority of Arabs living in East Jerusalem learned in the Jordanian system or the Palestinian Authority system, that not only included incitement, but it had a whole series of other challenges in terms of Bagrut and really being a successful program. That has changed now. Now the majority are learning actually the Israeli curriculum, which not only has removed incitement, but has better prepared them. So more of them are entering Israeli universities, more of them are entering trade schools, more of them are able to get jobs, which obviously helps them, helps the whole city, helps a whole series of different things. So it's the same concern, I think, but it's two different approaches of how you would tackle that particular problem.
Thank you, Rabbi. Again, thanks, everybody. It's great to see you all. Update on Carl's foot. He goes to the orthopedist tomorrow. Maybe we'll get the cast off his foot and we'll see Carl floating around again.